Welcome to Customer Love Stories, a podcast where we investigate why certain brands are loved or not loved by their customers. I'm your host, Robi Ganguly, CEO and co-founder of Apptentive. For those of you who don't know, Apptentive is a Seattle-based voice of the customer solution. But we're not here to talk about that. Today, we're talking about customer love with Andrew Wang. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh yeah, hey Roby, I'm happy to be here. I am currently a product manager at a company called Thrilling, and I live in San Francisco. Before Thrilling, I was a product manager at Guidewire, BizTech, Poshmark, and also at Gap, where we first met.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I was a program manager at companies like Ticketmaster, Live Nation, StubHub, and Wikia, which is now called Fandom. So I guess I know a thing or two about fans and communities. But my favorite title is being the father of twin boys. Here we go.
That's awesome. Now you got two people to be fans of forever.
Yeah, I'm definitely doing my best.
I'm sure doing a great job. Well, so the way we always like to start this podcast is by asking you who or what are you a fan of?
Yeah, for sure. I have to think about like the biggest influences in my life. That's aside from my family and friends, and I have to say that's the sport of basketball. It's something that I grew up playing. It's from a very young, impressionable age, all the way to my old age now, where I can't necessarily participate anymore. But I'm a huge fan, and I follow all the the news, all the teams, and so on and so on. And it's even led me to becoming a huge fan of a brand, Nike, which we're all very familiar with.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how did you first become a basketball fan? Like what drew you in?
Yeah, I think for me, it's I don't think my dad, who threw me a basketball, had any notion like this would become such a thing for me. I was a in elementary school, I was kind of chubby, and he just wanted me to get some exercise and burn off some energy, so he had me go, learn basketball and join a few teams and so on and so on. And I think over the years, it just became this conduit of community building, of a sense of like people with shared interests and be able to make friends and know people just by going to a pickup game. I've met a lot of friends this way, just like in college playing pickup ball, making a lot of friends. Um, you know, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just something that I can follow. It's, when I'm playing, I feel like I'm part of the team. We have this one singular goal, and it's just, it's really great to be part of a very inclusive community like this.
Yeah. So you're a fan of the entire sport, and
Mhm.
part of that is because you started early on to participate in it, right? So has that translated as a fan of the sport to a specific team for you? Like how much of that, because for a lot of people, when we talk about things like this, it's really a different way. It's like maybe I played the sport, but man, I love this team. But you're talking about it as like, hey, I picked up the sport and I just developed a love for that. So has it also translated in a team?
Sure, it's translated into teams. Growing up in the Bay Area, of course, the Warriors, and then when it came time to decide for college, I decided on UCLA, partially maybe influenced that they won the championship the year before in '95. And then after college, I was in LA when the Lakers were really just running the whole NBA in the early 2000s with Kobe and Shaq. So I was lucky enough to kind of see those dynasties, like those exciting basketball form from the Lakers to even all the way now to the Warriors. But I would just say it's just the love of the game. It's just the way, I don't know. It's like I said before. It's like just knowing that you're part of a team. You have the singular mission, the athleticism involved, the strategy involved, the level of skill that it takes, and also just I think the main thing is just also the teamwork. Like you gotta click. Like experience working together trumps a lot of other factors. So there's just so many things going on that just like wow, like all this comes together, it just makes a really good team.
So for you, part of the thing that you're really latching onto about the sport is the teamwork nature of it, and that it's the team over the individual. And I think I'm picking up in between what you're saying is not all sports are like that, but the way that basketball works and what it appeals to you around is like how crucial it is that it's got to be a good team that works together.
For sure. It's very cliched. There's only one ball on the court,
Yeah.
but then you also have a lot of different pieces. It has a singular player. You can't. I mean, to a certain degree, I guess you can influence the game in a really big way, but you can't play, 5-on-1.
No.
You can't win 5-on-1. And then aside from that, if you want to look even outside the team, right, you have the bench players, which I very well was in school, a bench player. But then you also have coaches and the supporting staff, and all that is just like super amazing to me when I look at it. You talk to, look at athletes, reporters asking them, how were they able to be successful, and a lot of them give credit to not just their teammates, but the supporting like trainers and things like that. So, it's just a crazy, I think, like you said, like teamwork, but not just at a team level, but like throughout the whole organization. That's what it takes to really win.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about being a fan of basketball as a participant and a person who watches it, maybe a person who went and cheered on UCLA, who went and cheered on the Lakers and cheers on the Warriors now, you're like, there are certain things when you're a fan you do that you wouldn't normally do, right? Like there are ways that you kind of push yourself. And I can tell by your giggle, you got a couple stories here. I'm gonna guess. What's the craziest thing you've done as a basketball fan?
The craziest thing, I mean, I don't know. It has to be like when I was at UCLA. Like they had just won the championship the year before I arrived there as a first year, and there was like a raffle. It's not like sophisticated as is now. It's super low tech. Right now it's like you get like you enter in electronically or whatever, right? But back then it was like you submit an application and they pick your name at random or whatever, or you can line up like overnight around Poly Pavilion and I've done that a few nights. The basketball hype was just so high. And then we just like, grabbed a couple of friends who were into basketball and we just, camped out overnight for those tickets. There was also things where like, I just played a lot of basketball, like in college, rather than going to class, I probably spent more time on the hard courts, like at least 20 hours a week.
Holy
It was
cow.
just, yeah, I was just running game like a few hours a day, every day, and like
Damn.
maybe take breaks. Like, yeah, it was also outdoors. So it was like super tan too. It got super skinny. But I made a lot of friends that way. I had like so much fun. And it was just like, I can still see it very vividly in my mind right now. Like some plays that I had or some plays I had with my friends. It was crazy.
So your commitment was to like camp out overnight to get the tickets and to play all the time. Like you demonstrated it with time and consistency and investment, right? Did you bring other people into it? Did you get other people to be like, hey, come be in line with us to camp out overnight or come run with me? Yeah, maybe they're a little casual, but by the end of your freshman year, you're just like, yeah, now that person's hooked the way I am.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a lot easier to say like come play ball with me than to say like let's sleep on the concrete overnight to get tickets.
Right. Yeah.
So so it was definitely easier like hey like pass by somebody in the dorms like hey I'm about to go run, you want to go, right? Like or they likely wouldn't go with me for like the full 3 or 5 hours, but like people come and go. And also sometimes I would just go by myself. It's
Yep.
just nice to, like new people to play with, just meeting people and things like that. So yeah, I guess a little bit of like evangelism, if you'll call it that. But yeah,
And so, what's interesting about you, and you talked about this right at the beginning, is that the fandom of basketball has, as a sport, it's been something you can participate in. It's also something you can observe and grow with and sort of change team affiliations. But then there's this aspect of it's also because you're such a fan, it's rubbed off to a commercial fandom of Nike. And
yeah,
so that's where like you're not just a customer of like maybe UCLA basketball or the Warriors basketball, like going to games.
Right.
It's you're a customer of Nike now too. Like, how did that happen? What unfolded for you to become like moving from this fan sport to like the company of Nike associated with the sport that becomes somebody? And I know you brought some props, so maybe there's a good time to show us what you're wearing, what you got.
Yeah, yeah. Let me answer those questions first, though. But like, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it's really that timing and they're just marketing is like amazing.
Yeah.
Timing, like they started off as like a running shoe brand, right? But they knew very early on to like sign amazing athletes and then really have amazing commercials that like just blew my mind was when I was a very impressionable young kid,
Right.
right? So Michael Jordan, everybody wanted to be like Mike. I did too, right? I drank a gallon of milk a day because I want to be 6'6" like Michael Jordan, right?
Did it work?
Didn't get there. No, didn't get there. I'm sorry. I'm 5'10". Uh, but like, watching, Mars Blackman, Spike Lee, those kind of commercials, like, it's got to be the shoes. Oh crap, here comes the shoes, right? Like, and it's just, I don't know, that kind of combination of marketing with merchandising just like really was infectious as a kid, and looking up to those like athletes that that Nike brand had signed, really did its job on me. So yeah, I mean, I'm wearing a t-shirt. I can stand up, but it's like
Oh
a
yeah,
brilliant shirt.
I love it.
And it has like a list of like all
Oh
the
man,
Jordans. It goes up. This one goes up till 2003, and like it goes
this
away all the way back.
Andrew's got a shirt on. For those of us who are just listening, it's the history of Air Jordan, and then on the shirt are prints of the historical Jordans from 1 through '03.
Yeah, 2003. So I must have got it like a little bit after college or so.
Yeah,
And then that also led me into that kind of nostalgia from when I was a kid.
yeah,
Also led me into kind of collecting sneakers. Like I'm not hardcore like some people. Like I'm a little bit older now, so I'm not camping out overnight at the Nike store anymore. But
yep.
like I've gotten lucky with a few like hits on the sneakers app. So like Jordan Retro Sixes. These are like the infrareds.
Those retro
These were my
sixes are so
first
pretty.
Jordans. These were the first Jordans that like my dad got me like when I was in high school, and he probably got me like counterfeits from China. I didn't care. Like these were so awesome. Like the all the like when in high school and all your friends were like, oh man, like, yeah, that was very impressionable on me. And then I have some other sneakers. Like this is probably the one that is the craziest for me, but it's like an off-white,
Whoa,
but it's like I got it for like $120, but now it sells resale for like over $800.
no
It's like
way.
crazy.
That's
And like,
intense.
but there are shoes that are even more crazy than this, right? But
Yeah,
this is just like, I don't know, it's just kind of crazy for me. So yeah, their merchandise, their sneakers, their clothing, especially these days really allows me to like chill out, leisure wear, I guess.
yeah, right.
So yeah, I mean, I walk around now. My daily is like this low top blue sneaker with a giant yellow swoosh on the side. I don't wear a lot of logos, but Nike swoosh on my shoes is probably one of the few.
Yeah, and I recently read Shoe Dog, Phil Knight's book, and he talks about like, they started out as this running shoe company, and they were actually just selling. They were trying to be on the western part of the United States, the exclusive distributor of Tiger running shoes, because he'd found these Tiger running shoes and they were like really performant. And that's how they started to build the company. But then over time, they started to build their own shoes. And when they lost that exclusivity with Tiger, they really had to move into making their own shoes. And he talks about realizing at a certain point that people were buying their shoes just to wear them out with jeans to like, go shopping. And
Yeah.
it started to be part of a style. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is something new. We've moved from like, we're a runner shoe to there's more of this lifestyle around it. And that coincided a little bit with, they started sponsoring athletes like Steve Prefontaine, right?
Yeah.
The famous runner was one of the first Nike athletes that they really got behind. And so by the time Jordan was coming up, they saw this model that had worked with marquee athletes and they kind of bet themselves on him. And then they didn't really, I don't think anybody could have predicted how much of a phenomenon Jordan was going to be over the course of his career. I think their prediction was something like $3 million worth of shoes sold within the first 5 years of signing him was kind of their goal. And nowadays they sell, I think the stat is $3 million of Jordan shoes every 5 minutes. So it's like a
Crazy.
totally different scale of the business. But when it crossed over from being just utilitarian shoes for running, or here's a basketball shoe, to being like, I want to wear the newest Jordans, not because I play basketball, but because they just look awesome and it signifies like things about me and what I care about. Well, that's a pretty big shift. What what do you like? What makes you want to wear that shoe and be proud of wearing that logo where most of the other stuff you wear isn't like really logo oriented?
Um, I don't know. It's just maybe it's nostalgia. Maybe it's like, holding on to my childhood. I, you talk about craziest things I've done in terms of fandom. Like I remember in college, like instead of getting a regular backpack or a messenger bag for my textbooks, I actually had like a Nike duffel bag,
Oh
and
yeah.
in it I had my books, sure, that I kind of opened, right, but I also had like pairs, sneakers for playing basketball outdoors, and another pair of sneakers for playing ball indoors, and I had the sneakers that I had on to walk around, right? So it's I don't know. It's just I I can't explain that. Like I don't know. I guess I'm also conscious about like wearing logos from everything, like being so logoed out. But I feel like shoes. That's I don't know. For some reason, it's okay to me in my great mind.
Well, I think it's, some of these things, the reason we talk about customer love is it's an emotional thing. It's not just
Hmm.
logical and intellectual, right? Like there's feelings involved. And so you're talking about nostalgia. Nostalgia is such a powerful emotional draw, right? When we feel nostalgic, and it reminds you of like running the court when you're like 20 and you're a golden god on the court for 3 to 5 hours a day, right? Like it's just sort of like part of your identity, your persona. So I think that's part of what goes on. But I'm wondering if for you there's an aspect of the way that Nike has supported basketball that makes you feel connected. Like, does that matter to you when you think about your love of basketball and then your love of Nike?
For sure it does. I mean, aside from their products, they've done a lot of good things for the community as well. I'm really proud of how they, I this is kind of controversial, but how they stood up for like Colin Kaepernick and everything.
Yeah.
They are, you know, I mean, I don't want to say they don't have their flaws, right? There are some controversies with the brand, but in the most part, I appreciate things. They're like one of the first companies that where I can, I've actually done this. I send back my old shoes and they recycle it to like playing courts for kids and stuff, right?
Yeah. Right.
So that's really cool. And just um, yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's nostalgia. Seeing it around me, like everybody, seeing a lot of people out there that's are still fans, like being part of that community. I can wear these Jordans out, right? And I can walk through San Francisco to dinner, and at least I guarantee you, at least two or three people will say like comment on shoes and we start a conversation.
That's
Like
awesome.
it's that's also that kind of draw too. Like yeah,
Yeah.
I was at a sushi restaurant in San Francisco, and I came out, and the security guard was just like, "Hey, nice kicks," and then we started talking about how like the other night, Zaza Pachulia was eating at his parkade outside, but he had to sit way back because he's a 7 footer, so it's just that kind of like, hey, cool. I guess I belong in this kind of community, and we have something that can just be a conversation starter.
So that's really interesting. I think that the conversation starter, like going back to like why are you okay with the logos? Like the community of people a Nike logo can start a conversation with for you is it has some relevancy. It's got some aspect of like I don't mind that community talking to me about my shoes. They sort of like respect what I've got on. They can
Right.
recognize it. They're like, "Oh, are those the 96 Jordans? Oh yeah, that's when they did this thing." So there's this aspect of like what you're signing to other people is like this is what I know and this is what I care about, and like if you talk to me about it, I'm probably going to be totally receptive. I think.
Yeah.
Does that sound fair?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love this segment, dude. Like you're being my therapist. You're trying to like read people's mind. But yeah, absolutely. I think being part of that community is something that I I guess I encourage and I revel in. More so than some other communities, you know, like I have a lot of interests. I'm a fan of a lot of things, right? So I mean, I dabble in those other different communities as well. But you know, the one that really stands out for me is like wearing these Nike sneakers now.
Right, right. And when we think about the things that they've done over the years, you mentioned controversy, right?
Yeah.
But I hear controversy and I hear strong feelings, right? I hear Colin Kaepernick and I hear having a stand, taking a stand, right? And so I don't think you can be really in this world dynamic if you're not willing to take a stand, if you're not willing to undergo controversy, if you're always shying away from it, it's you're pretty average, right? It's hard for you to really identify and stand out for something. So like, I think about Nike as having courage as a corporation in a bunch of ways to take those stands. Does that resonate for you or is it different? Like how do you think about that?
I think so. I think you hit a point there where, especially with Colin Kaepernick, like I think that kind of stance, you know, aligns with mine,
Yep.
right? So I'm all for it. You know, I'm a fan. I you know I would consider buying a Colin Kaepernick Nike jersey, branded jersey, because of that. You know, there are also like, you know, I mentioned the commercials before. Like, you know, it's a spirit of, you know, going out there and giving it your all. You know, starting off as a kid, you know, no matter who you are, you know, a kid, adult, young, you know, men, women, you know, you can do anything you want, you know, if you just go for it, right? I think that message also really resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you know, I think, you know, their values that comes out in their language of like marketing, merchandising, all that like definitely strikes a strong chord with me.
Yep. Yep. And little known fact about me is years and years ago, before I started Apptentive, I was helping a number of companies with their digital strategy. And for a period of time, about 6 weeks, I was helping Nike women on Twitter, and
Cool.
I was the voice of Nike women on Twitter behind the scenes for a while as they were promoting this app they released, Nike Women Training Club, and it was a free app, and it had all these different workouts in it, and they really wanted to get the word out in different channels, and I was their voice. And what was really cool was before I was allowed to post anything, they gave me a whole brand document, and it was like 10 pages of the language they use and language they don't use, like very
Wow.
specific. Like Nike customers are athletes. They're not aspiring athletes. They're not
Mm,
wannabe athletes. They're athletes. We have this whole ethos inside of Nike about performance, right? We talk about performance. We don't necessarily talk about win. It's perform, right? And
mm,
it's this culture of being so specific about what they really want to stand for that they had a huge brand document that I then had to read and incorporate into the language that made me really see them through the lens of like, this isn't an accident what they're doing,
right.
how they show up is it's on purpose.
Yeah. I I mean, I can't imagine reading through all 10 pages because I think by the time you work for Nike, like I think all of that has to be ingrained in you somehow, right? Like I have friends that, you know, work for Nike or they interviewed for Nike. And, you know, I remember one of my friends like, yeah, he interviewed there and his interviewer had just finished a game of tennis and he was just coming in his like tennis gear and he's like sweating, right? And it's just that kind of like you said, ethos and talking about specific points that like you're just not a participant, but you're an athlete
Right.
because you've already made it.
Right.
You know, we don't want you to think that like you're trying to do like just by doing something you've already made it.
Right.
So that kind of messaging, I think is really cool. Of course, it definitely does take a brand like Nike over many years and many experiences to kind of formulate something like that now.
Totally. Totally. Now, along the way, Nike's had the opportunity to stand up and make choices, and it's clearly resonated with you. I think the way in which they've taken a stand, again, thinking about Kaepernick, that comes to mind for you because it resonates. What would make you leave a brand you love? Like you said, you're a fan of a lot of things. Do you have an example of a brand that like actually lost your customer love?
Um, I don't. I think the first, I guess, example that comes to mind was when I was like, oh, like I've been wearing Nikes for so long. Let me see what else is out there. Like,
Hmm.
like so I actually tried on. I bought a pair of Adidas basketball shoes, and I wore them for like 3 months or so and playing ball. But then after like I think 3 months, the product just wore out. Like the
Oh wow.
sole just got completely worn out a lot quicker than I expected. I wrote them. I sent the box back, and they were actually really quick to like send me a gift card, in the amount and try to make it right. I thought it was really cool of them, but it kind of made me push away Adidas forever.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, hey, I needed to go ball the next day, and I have to wait for this now, like, and it's kind of like I don't want to say it's like I gave you a chance and you dropped it, but it's like a moment where I kind of gave you a chance and I needed you to kind of perform and it just kind of wasn't there. So
Right.
that kind of product quality um, moved me like push me kind of back to Nike and be like, okay, I think this kind of reaffirms like I know it's really unfair. It's like just one example. I'm blown away Adidas, and they have a lot of great products. But for me, it was just like, okay, I'm sticking back with Nike now.
Yeah, I've found really interesting doing this podcast is people are a lot more hesitant to critique than talk about the things that they love. But I think the fact of the matter is you have such a big experience with Nike, and you know how their shoes last. And you went and you're like, I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to see what's out there. And Adidas didn't last. And even though they treated you well in terms of like trying to rectify it, you're
Yeah,
like, but am I going to really go through this for another 3 months and have it
right.
repeat? Like my my need is basketball shoes I can rely on every day so I can lace them up and go play. And I don't think I'm getting that here. And that you had one chance to prove that you could be on par or maybe even better and you failed. Regardless of how you try to accommodate the problem afterwards, you failed, right? And I think that's the part of the nature of customer love too. Is like, if you fail on a certain front that matters to me and you haven't earned my trust, it's over. It's just not worth it.
It's really tough. I think, right. I think if I was Adidas, I would be like, and I heard this podcast, I'd be like, oh man, like it was just one time, give us another chance, blah 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 blah, right? Like maybe I will, down the line or so. But I think at that moment, I think I was just so emotionally vested. Like it goes back to emotions, right? So emotionally vested. I'm like, okay, cool, I got my money back, but I don't have my time back.
Right.
And I was getting ready to go do this tomorrow or the next week, and I'm not ready for it because of this. It's not just the money, but there's also the time element, the emotions. There's a lot of factors into
I
it.
think that is such an important statement. I can get my money back, but I can't get my time back. It's like I think one of the reasons the airlines are so hated is when they fail, they cost you so much time.
Yeah,
When they fail, there's so much time, and it's just like, ah, I never
it's
want
already a
to do that.
stressful situation.
Mm-hmm.
You're traveling with kids.
With kids, yeah, you got twins. You're like, there are four of us. You better get us out of here on
You
time. You
better make
better
it
land
right.
on time. Yeah, and if you don't, I'm going to look for an alternative.
It's like so. I I have another good example of this, like we're talking about time. It's door dashing. Like we have
Yep.
kids, right? And we're like we can't cook all the time. So occasionally we cheat and we order DoorDash, right? And most of the times they're great. There are a couple of times where the food is just missing. It's gone.
Ugh.
And we had ordered so late because the kids finally went to sleep and the restaurant's closed. They can't make it anymore. But like I
Ugh.
so wanted that one thing. I was craving it. The anticipation of like waiting 30 minutes and you're telling me it's lost somewhere. The DoorDash driver probably, took the food and went left or whatever. And there's nothing else you can do besides giving me credit. Like I'm hungry, I'm angry now. But yeah, but I digress. We still go back to DoorDash.
Well, I mean, so that is an interesting thing, right? Like, so that's a place where you got strong emotions. And
Yeah.
I know that feeling, right? That feeling of like, I've been looking forward to those Dan noodles. They're
Mm-hmm.
so freaking good. And they show up and it's like, there's the green beans, there's the
Uh,
pot stickers, there's the
uh,
no Dan noodles. Everything is crushed. All of my
yeah.
hopes and dreams. And you're just like, I can't deal with this. I'm so frustrated. But you go back. And the thing that keeps you going back is what with DoorDash, and because you're continuing to stay a customer.
Yeah, and it's totally irrational, right? Like, why wouldn't I give Adidas the same kind of second chance? Uh, it's totally irrational. So, like, yeah, I'm there like throwing a tantrum like one of my kids. But the next day we find ourselves in the same situation. I'm like, oh, let's give DoorDash a try. Um, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Like maybe because they haven't failed me twice in a row. I like them better than the alternatives. Maybe that's the main one.
Yeah, there you go. The alternatives do not present a better option to you.
Right, like for me, I I stopped using Uber. So like
Hmm.
I don't use Uber rides. I don't use Uber Eats at all until they can get their working culture kind of back together. I know there's something to work on, but that's like the moment that kind of thing happened with Travis and everything, I deleted my Uber apps.
So that's a place where you went probably from a regular fan being in San Francisco where Uber grew up and just took the
Yeah,
world by storm to being
yeah,
completely out because Travis and leadership that was there at the time had such a toxic culture that you didn't agree with. You're like, nope, don't want to be here. I got alternatives like Lyft. I would imagine is one of the
yeah.
yeah. Okay, okay, that makes sense. So like now I'm picturing this a little bit more. Adidas kind of failed because you knew the alternative with Nike.
Yeah,
Adidas failed. It was like, no, you're not as good, and you can try to make it better, but I don't trust that you're as good. And then you got DoorDash, and they're like, they fail sometimes, but I like them better than the alternatives.
yeah,
And then you got Uber, and Uber's like, we invented this thing. Andrew, you never would have had any expectation that you could do this if it wasn't for us. And you're like, yeah, but I now have alternatives, and they
right.
run their businesses differently, so I will leave.
Yeah, I think like I said, you're being a great therapist for me. You're teasing out all these things that are in my mind, but I hadn't thought to answer the first time. I think you put it very succinctly. Like, yeah, I I was a fan of Uber from the very beginning. Like, I knew I knew that they used to be called Uber Taxi,
Right,
but then the taxi unions got pissed off, so they had to drop the word taxi. I used them when there were only black cars before they did like ride
right,
sharing.
right.
And then all this news came out, and it was just the toxic masculinity, the difficult working environment, and I'm lucky where I haven't really worked at a place like that, but I I don't know, kind of social justice. I kind of want to discourage other people from experiencing that. So I looked at my wife. I'm like, hey, I'm going to do Uber. And she said, okay, me too. And that's what we did. And except the only time we had to use Uber was when we were overseas because Lyft is not overseas.
Right,
Okay, fine.
right.
But any other time, like, yeah, we use Lyft for a ride sharing if we have to. And then DoorDash for food deliveries.
Yep, yep. I made a similar choice, and similarly, when I'm overseas, that's the place that I find myself using Uber more often. But here in the States, I'm a Lyft person. I'm very loyal to Lyft, and I think that culture, that ethos, and some of the decisions they made early on is just stuck with me, and it's really hard for me to like get back and get away from that feeling that I've had. So when we're talking about this, exploring some of the loyalty and like what brings people into the community, you've seen a lot of retail. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as a result of seeing a lot of retail, you've seen how different brands are perceived, how people shop. Currently, like you're working at Thrilling, which has this sort of like vintage shopping and thrifting
Mm.
aspect of searching. So you're actually, I think, asking people to do a little bit more work to find the thing that's special, like this hidden gem. Does that does this stuff influence how you build product as you're thinking about, hey, we got to take people on a journey to get to like some brand satisfaction or find something that's like a hidden gem in order for them to have an emotional connection with us?
Absolutely. It absolutely goes into product building. And I think I I think what I've learned over the years of being a product manager is that I, as a product manager, can't definitively say what will work or what won't work. Like there definitely has to be a lot of research, a lot of testing involved, a lot of like really quick test and learns and moving on to the next thing if it doesn't work. And we've done a lot of that thrilling. I've never worked at a company that small before. We're about 20-30 person company, and there's a lot of tools that I haven't had when I was, such as before when I was working at Poshmark and Gap, where I had like, a lot of budgets and a lot of resources to do consumer insights and so on and so on. So, we've, at Thrilling, creating a feature that kind of like delights and excites our users um, is, I would say, it's definitely a lot more difficult, but it's also a lot more there's a lot more response because that community in itself, the user community or the source community in itself, they're more than happy to provide feedback. They're very enthusiastic, like, hey, this is what I think you should be doing, so on and so on, and has all product managers know just because somebody says that's something that they want is not necessarily what they actually really want or solves their needs. I think a great example of something that worked is the team over at Poshmark. They've created this community. Yes, like I think anybody can kind of create a community or like a place where people with kind of similar interests to gather. But they've done it in a way where it's very an obsessive behavior, right? Like they created this action, like you got to go on there, and in order for your products to sell, you got to keep constantly share within the app. So everybody goes on there and share. So that creates engagements. And that also, when you're in the app, you're also like, thinking about selling your own things, but you're also in the same app as a buyer, you're also thinking about buying things. So it's this really circular community that drives a lot of engagement, that drives a lot of passion with their users. And I think when I was there, I was really amazed at the community that they had built and the kind of the emotions, like you said, that they drive.
So then, like one of the things I'm really curious about is, how do you cultivate that emotional connection digitally, right? Because what I've learned today is we're talking is you got into basketball because it was an experience. You played basketball. You got into it and you're like, I love this sport. I love the
Yeah.
teamwork. I'm connected to this community of people. And then you became really a fan of Nike because it's affinity with the sport and the way they showed up, but then also that was gear that was great for you to play in. And now not only is it gear that's great to play in, it's gear that when you walk around, people recognize it. So it's kind of signing to other people, here's what I care about, here's what I'm interested in. But how do you do that digitally? And I think what you're saying is one of the things at Poshmark is creating into the product experience a little bit of that motion to like come back and play around and have a connection with the community in the digital space is part of what you were doing that was so successful. Is that right?
I think that's a good way to put it. I guess what I would say is creating a habit.
Hmm. I think that's better. I think what I really wanted to say is you're intentional about creating habits.
Yeah, and if a person latches onto that, like, oh, this translates to something, like that aha moment, and that person will keep coming back to that habit, and that habit drives more engagement. An example I have for this is so for Nike, their sneakers app, right? This is the app where they raffle out sneakers for people to
Yep.
collect. And they have releases almost every day, not every day, but almost every day at exactly the same time, 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 Eastern. So it creates that kind of habit, like it's happening. you got to check the app at 7 a.m. and you got to try. I mean, yeah, people use bots and stuff. I haven't gone that crazy, but like you've created that kind of habit of like, okay, let me look through the app. Let me see what's coming up. Oh, that's a cool design. I think I want that. Oh, that's a cool behind the scenes of how they came up with that design. Oh, that's a cool interview with Tinker Hatfield, so on and so on. Okay, set alarm, 7 a.m. on Tuesday. I'm going to check that out.
Yep.
Like, I think that kind of obsession or that kind of habit forming is one way to do it in digitally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you are thinking about creating that habit and trying to connect with people, how do you know that you're tapping into something that's like a real emotion as opposed to a game, right? Like the way I think about this is that there's a lot of gaming mechanics that people have tried and used in
Yeah.
order to try and like get people to do something, and sometimes it doesn't stick. It doesn't really last. So like, how do you understand customer emotion through the lens of the things that, as a product leader, you're creating? Features, pulls into the product. How do you discern the difference between like, this is a game and it's not going to last versus this is actually creating this habit and it's kind of emotionally connecting us?
Like, how do you confirm that it is something that is performing or being authentic or
Yeah.
returning value as it is? Yeah, I don't. I mean, I guess it depends on the feature or the habit you're trying to build. But I, in the example of something that's not digital like Nike, I mean, that takes years and years, generations to kind of build up. But digitally, everything moves so quickly. I mean, you would like, has a product manager, has any company, you would like it to show up in revenue, in sales, of
Yeah.
course.
Right.
Um, but I mean, as we launch a feature, we do want to monitor other leading metrics, right? Engagement, adoption, especially with marketplaces like Thrilling and Poshmark. How does an engagement on one side of the marketplace, on the seller side, how does that affect the engagement on the buyer side, or
Right.
vice versa?
Right.
Um, and I think it's really important to be kind of set goals when you're doing these kind of tests, and really take a good look at the data. And if it's like, let me be clear here. Like, I would say 90% of the A/B tests I've ever run, like, there's no clear winner. Like, it's all
Right.
like muddled, right? And at a company like Thrilling, where we, aren't as popular as Poshmark, we don't have as many, as much traffic. We have to make a quick call. Like, we got to move on to the next test. We can't wait for this to reach this little significance. So there's just a lot of like gut feelings, gut checks, but hopefully that's also backed up by data. I know I'm not really answering that question just very clearly. I think what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of different factors involved, including things that are qualitative and quantitative that aren't decisive. And I think it's important, I guess, sum it up, make it as a team. Like, we're all kind of like trying to figure this out. And 90% of the time, we're not going to figure it out, but we got to keep trying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that, it's really hard to balance metrics and intuition when you're trying to understand customer emotion, because it doesn't necessarily always show up. I think retention certainly is an indicator when people are retaining at a higher and
Sure.
higher rate. Like, you're clearly doing some things that are working more and they're coming back. So I think that's one thing. But in what you're describing, you can't always have that metric quickly enough to know that the change you made is actually leading to higher retention. So, I think there's another aspect I'm curious about, just in the intentionality around building products, digital or otherwise, is authenticity. And
Yeah.
so, I understand that Thrilling is like pretty mission focused, right? It's like a
Yes.
BIPOC owned, diversity focused company and marketplace. It's a part of the mission. So there's this authenticity around the community you're building. And I wonder, how does that play in to how you think about the emotional connection and what you're doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very good point. Has a, lesser known company, we've had struggles on how to make ourselves more known,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then one thing we can always fall back on are, or value prop or mission statements. So that's actually something that we tested. That's actually something like, before I started, we had a homepage that was just, very marketplace, like some products and categories. And then working with our VP of growth, we thought about like, hey, how do we bring out, more of what Thrilling's about? Like, give users or new site visitors, how do they know that we're trustworthy? So we started a few different tests, and these were like essentially like putting like a value prop on the homepage. Like support small businesses, shop vintage, right? And this was the 10% of A/B test that we're clearly want. Like it definitely positively influenced our product clicks as well as our conversion rate. And then we decided to double down on that. Like, okay, how about let's include quotes from reputable media about like who we are, what we do, how we support small businesses and things like that. And that also was very successful. So like, okay, how do we now that we know that it works, how do we keep doing this? But like, I don't know, there's only so much we can put out there, like in your face, like, hey, these are our values, like these are what we're about. So like, how do we get these on an individual, like, how do we represent that in the stores?
Right.
Like, hey, this store is selling this product, and how do we elevate, this store so that their platform is also known to the shoppers, and hopefully they'll be able to make a connection by making a sale there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was a very clear indicator to us as a small and growing company that like bringing out, like you said, what we're about, or how our values are aligned was very important for our site.
That is really interesting. So, kind of thinking about our conversation today and pulling some of these pieces together for some takeaways, I think, starting off with your involvement in basketball and the community aspect, and then like having that bring Nike into your sphere, and then trusting them as somebody who provided you with great shoes, but also a brand that stood for something. And then thinking about where you are building digital products, there's this aspect of like, we're trying to build a community, we're trying to build a habit that you're really thinking about in terms of like building that emotional connection with customers through the notion of habit in the product. But then there's also the like, hey, we have an identity. There's something that's uniquely us. And as you were testing it in the digital realm, you found that actually talking about it more authentically led to customers being more receptive, right? That they were finding themselves, maybe like you found yourself in basketball, they started to find themselves, hey, I connect with this. This resonates for me. And the data actually took it forward and said, yeah, that's not just leading to emotional connection, it's leading to actions. And then we're going to go further into it. So there's this thing that you're building at Thrilling that has this core authentic story about what we're doing and small businesses and how we're helping them. And that's actually proving itself out in the data. And that emotional connection is translating to business results. And that feedback loop that you've got that's pretty quick is helping you actually tune to that and maybe even reinforce your value and say, yeah, this is why we do this.
Yeah, I think that last part is also really important. I think that like that validates us internally as well.
Yeah,
They're kind of like circular reinforcing. It made us look and like, yeah, we should, like, yes, this is us. And that's a big part of why I joined Grillings. Like I wanted to support, these small mom and pop boutiques, these businesses. And that really reaffirmed to me, like, yes, I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to be here helping, these small businesses win.
I love it. I love it. That's super awesome. Well, Andrew, I really want to say thank you for joining us and telling us a lot more about where you're coming from, what you're a fan of, where customer love comes from for you. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Oh man, I'm not that fancy. I don't have a website or anything like that, but you can always find me on LinkedIn,
LinkedIn.
under Andrew L. Wang.
Awesome.
I know it's a really popular name, but I think if you just punch in Andrew Wang, you'll see me there.
And for those of you listening, we are going to add this to the show notes in addition to some links to a couple of the anecdotes and the companies that we talked about, and probably a link to the Shoe Dog, the Phil Knight book, if you're interested more about how Nike has built its brand. As always, thank you for tuning in. To all of our listeners, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and give us a rating and review at www.ratethispodcast.com/CLS. We love feedback too, and we wish you all the best and hope you continue to deliver customer love in everything you do.
Thanks, Robi. Thanks, everybody.